Sheriff Coleman thought he was the most powerful man in Millfield. In his small town, his word was law, his badge commanded respect. But that day, when he encountered the black driver, he had no idea that the man could establish direct contact with one of the most powerful people in the entire state. And when he learned this, he would understand just how fragile his power really was.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and a comment before we start to learn more about what happened.
The morning sun cast long shadows across Highway 47 as it cut through the heart of Millfield County, a stretch of rural Georgia where cotton fields met pine forests and time seemed to move at its own pace. For Sheriff Jake Coleman, this was his kingdom, a place where his authority was absolute and his word was final. At 52, Coleman had been sheriff for nearly 15 years, inheriting both the position and the attitudes from his predecessor. He was a large man with graying hair and steel blue eyes that had grown cold with years of unchecked power. His uniform was always pressed, his badge polished, and his confidence unshakable. In Millfield, population 3,847, Jake Coleman was the law. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Coleman had finished his coffee at Mabel's diner, exchanged pleasantries with the regulars, and climbed into his patrol car to begin his rounds. The radio crackled with routine dispatch calls, but nothing that required his immediate attention. Deputy Martinez could handle the minor incidents. Coleman preferred the bigger picture, the impression of authority that came with his presence on the roads. As he drove down Highway 47, Coleman's attention was caught by a sleek black Mercedes sedan with Georgia state plates. The car was traveling at exactly the speed limit, nothing suspicious about its movement, but something about it irritated him. In his experience, expensive cars driven by black men in his county usually meant one of two things: drugs or trouble. Either way, it was worth investigating. Coleman flipped on his lights and pulled the Mercedes over near Miller's Creek, a secluded spot where he often conducted his more thorough investigations. As the sedan came to a smooth stop on the shoulder, Coleman took his time approaching, letting the driver wait and wonder what he might have done wrong. Through the driver's side window, Coleman could see a well-dressed black man in his early 40s, wearing a crisp white shirt and navy blazer. The man's hands were visible on the steering wheel, his posture calm and professional. But to Coleman, these details only confirmed his suspicions. In his worldview, a black man driving an expensive car and dressing above his station was inherently suspicious. Marcus Thompson had been expecting this call for months. As senior policy advisor to Governor Patricia Wells, he spent considerable time traveling throughout Georgia, visiting rural communities and assessing local needs for state programs. He had been warned by colleagues about certain counties where his presence might be unwelcome, and Millfield was near the top of that list. Thompson had grown up in Atlanta, earned his law degree from Emory University, and spent 2 decades building a reputation as one of the state's most effective policy analysts. His expertise in rural development and criminal justice reform had made him indispensable to Governor Wells, who relied on his insights for some of her most important initiatives. But none of that mattered to Sheriff Coleman as he approached the Mercedes. "Step out of the vehicle," Coleman commanded, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. Thompson complied without hesitation, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He had learned long ago that cooperation, even in the face of obvious harassment, was the safest path forward. "License and registration," Coleman demanded, though he made no move to actually examine the documents when Thompson handed them over. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" Thompson asked, his voice calm and professional. Coleman's eyes narrowed. "I'll ask the questions here, boy." The racial slur hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Thompson felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. He had dealt with men like Coleman before, and he knew that engaging would only escalate the situation. "Where are you headed?" Coleman continued, circling the Mercedes like a predator stalking prey. "I have a meeting in the county seat," Thompson replied truthfully. "What kind of meeting?" Thompson hesitated. His meeting was with the county commissioners to discuss a state-funded infrastructure project, but he sensed that revealing too much would only inflame Coleman's suspicions. "Business," Thompson said simply. Coleman laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Business? What kind of business could someone like you possibly have in my county?" The implication was clear, and Thompson felt his patience beginning to wear thin. "Legal business, Sheriff." "Legal business," Coleman repeated mockingly. "You know what I think. I think you're running drugs through my county. I think that fancy car and those expensive clothes are paid for with dirty money." Thompson's phone buzzed in his pocket. He could see from the display that it was Governor Wells' office, probably wondering why he was running late for the scheduled call with the commissioners. But Coleman was too focused on his performance to notice. "Empty your pockets," Coleman ordered. "Sheriff, I haven't committed any crime. I'm simply traveling through your county on legitimate business." Coleman stepped closer, close enough that Thompson could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "In my county, I decide what's legitimate. Now empty your pockets or I'll empty them for you." Thompson reached slowly into his jacket pocket and removed his wallet, keys, and phone. Coleman snatched them up, examining each item with exaggerated suspicion. "Fancy phone," Coleman commented, handling Thompson's iPhone roughly. "Expensive wallet. Where did you steal these from?" "I didn't steal anything, Sheriff. Those are my personal belongings." Coleman opened the wallet and pulled out Thompson's driver's license, credit cards, and business cards. His eyes lingered on one particular card, but he was more interested in asserting his dominance than actually reading what it said. "Marcus Thompson," he read aloud from the license. "Atlanta address. I knew it. You city boys think you can come down here and run your operations in my backyard." "I'm not running any operations, Sheriff. I'm here on official business." "Official business?" Coleman's laugh was even harsher this time. "The only official business you need to worry about is explaining to a judge why you were trafficking drugs through Millfield County." Thompson's phone rang again. This time, Coleman noticed. "Popular man, aren't you?" Coleman said, declining the call without looking at who was calling. "Drug dealers usually are." "That was an important call, Sheriff. I really need to take it." "The only call you need to worry about is the one to your lawyer," Coleman replied, "because you're under arrest." "On what charges?" "Suspicion of drug trafficking, resisting arrest, and anything else I decide to add between here and the station." Coleman reached for his handcuffs, clearly enjoying the moment. In his mind, he was performing a public service, removing another criminal from his streets. The fact that he had no evidence and no probable cause was irrelevant. In Millfield County, his badge was all the justification he needed. But as he moved to place Thompson under arrest, the phone rang again. This time, the caller was persistent enough that the ringing seemed to echo in the quiet morning air. "Turn that damn thing off," Coleman snarled. "Sheriff, please." That could be an emergency. Coleman grabbed the phone and was about to decline the call when he noticed something that made him pause. The caller ID read, "Governor's Office, Patricia Wells." For the first time since the stop began, Coleman felt a flicker of uncertainty. But his arrogance quickly overwhelmed any sense of caution. "Governor's Office," he said with a sneer. "Right. And I'm the President of the United States." He declined the call and tossed the phone back to Thompson. "Nice try, but fake caller IDs don't work on me." But the phone immediately rang again. Same caller, same identifier. This time, Coleman's confidence wavered slightly. He had dealt with enough criminals to know that elaborate deceptions were usually beyond their capabilities. But the idea that he might be harassing someone with actual connections to the governor's office seemed impossible. "Answer it," he commanded, wanting to expose what he assumed was Thompson's bluff. Thompson accepted the call and put it on speaker. "Marcus Thompson." "Marcus, where are you?" The voice was unmistakably that of Governor Patricia Wells, a woman whose televised speeches and press conferences had made her voice familiar to every Georgian. "The commissioners are waiting for your call, and we need to finalize the infrastructure allocations before the budget meeting this afternoon." Coleman's face went pale. The voice was too clear, too authoritative, too genuine to be faked. But he still couldn't process what he was hearing. "Governor Wells," Thompson said, his eyes never leaving Coleman's face, "I apologize for the delay. I've been detained by local law enforcement." "Detained? For what?" "The sheriff seems to believe I'm involved in drug trafficking." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Governor Wells spoke again, her voice carried an edge that made Coleman's blood run cold. "Put the sheriff on the phone." Coleman's hands were shaking as he took the device. His mouth felt dry, and his confidence had evaporated entirely. "This is Sheriff Coleman." "Sheriff Coleman, this is Governor Patricia Wells. The man you have detained is my senior policy advisor, Marcus Thompson. He is traveling through your county on official state business at my direct request. Can you explain to me why you have interfered with a state official in the performance of his duties?" Coleman tried to speak, but no words came out. The reality of his situation was crashing down around him like a collapsing building. He had not just stopped a random citizen, he had harassed, threatened, and attempted to arrest one of the most powerful people in state government. "Sheriff?" Governor Wells' voice cut through his panic. "I'm waiting for an explanation." "Governor, there was a misunderstanding," Coleman managed to stammer. "I didn't know who he was." "You didn't know who he was? So you routinely arrest black men driving expensive cars without probable cause? Is that standard procedure in Millfield County?" Coleman's career flashed before his eyes. 15 years of absolute authority, of being the biggest fish in a small pond, of never having to answer to anyone above the county level. All of it was crumbling in real time. "No, ma'am. I mean, there was reasonable suspicion." "Reasonable suspicion of what, exactly?" "Driving while black, having a nice car, wearing professional attire." "Governor, please. I can explain." "Oh, you'll have plenty of opportunity to explain, Sheriff. To the State Bureau of Investigation, to the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, and to the media. But right now, I want you to do something very simple. I want you to apologize to Mr. Thompson, return his belongings and get out of his way so he can continue with the important work he's doing on behalf of the people of Georgia." Coleman looked at Thompson, who stood quietly beside his car, his expression unreadable. The man he had called "boy" just minutes earlier was now revealed as someone with direct access to the most powerful office in the state. "Mr. Thompson," Coleman said, his voice barely above a whisper, I apologize for the misunderstanding." Thompson nodded curtly but said nothing. "Sheriff," Governor Wells continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of her authority, "consider this your only warning. If I receive any further reports of harassment, racial profiling, or abuse of authority from your department, I will personally ensure that you face federal civil rights charges. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now put Mr. Thompson back on the phone." Coleman handed the device back with trembling hands, feeling as though he might collapse from the weight of his humiliation. "Marcus," Governor Wells said, her tone immediately warming, "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Are you all right?" I'm fine, Governor. Just another day in rural Georgia. Well, it shouldn't be. And if Sheriff Coleman doesn't understand that by now, he will soon enough. Take your time getting to the commissioners' meeting. I'll make sure they know you were delayed by circumstances beyond your control. Thank you, Governor. And Marcus? Document everything, every detail of this stop. I want a full report on my desk by end of business today. Of course. After Thompson ended the call, the two men stood in silence for a long moment. Coleman was still processing the magnitude of his mistake, while Thompson was considering his next move. Sheriff, Thompson said finally, his voice calm but firm, you made several assumptions about me today based solely on the color of my skin. You assumed I was a criminal, assumed I didn't belong in your county, assumed I was someone you could intimidate and abuse without consequences. Coleman opened his mouth to respond, but Thompson held up a hand to stop him. You called me boy. You accused me of stealing my own possessions. You were prepared to arrest me on fabricated charges. And why? Because in your mind, a black man driving a nice car couldn't possibly be anything other than a criminal. Mr. Thompson, I'm not finished, Thompson said, his voice gaining strength. I've dedicated my career to public service, to making life better for people across this state. That includes people in rural counties like this one. But your actions today represent everything that's wrong with law enforcement in communities like Millfield. Coleman stood silently, finally understanding the full scope of his error. The infrastructure project I came here to discuss, it would have brought jobs to your county, improved your roads, upgraded your emergency services. But after today, I'll be recommending that those funds be allocated elsewhere. Communities that treat all citizens with dignity and respect. The financial implications hit Coleman like a physical blow. Millfield County desperately needed state funding for infrastructure improvements. Without it, the local economy would continue to stagnate. Please, Coleman said, his voice breaking, don't punish the whole county for my mistake. Thompson studied the sheriff's face, seeing genuine fear and regret for the first time since the stop began. That depends on you, Sheriff. This incident will be investigated, documented, and reviewed at the highest levels of state government. How it affects your county's relationship with the state will depend on whether you use this as a learning opportunity or continue business as usual. Thompson got back into his Mercedes, leaving Coleman standing alone on the roadside. As he drove away, he could see the sheriff in his rearview mirror, standing beside his patrol car with his head in his hands, finally understanding the true cost of his prejudice. 3 hours later, Thompson was in the commissioners' meeting, calmly discussing infrastructure needs and state funding priorities. But his mind kept returning to the encounter with Sheriff Coleman and to the thousands of other black men who had faced similar harassment without the protection of political connections. That evening, Thompson filed his report with Governor Wells' office, detailing every aspect of the stop. Within a week, the State Bureau of Investigation had launched a formal investigation into the Millfield County Sheriff's Department. Within a month, Sheriff Coleman had announced his resignation, citing personal reasons. The infrastructure funding was eventually approved, but with strict oversight and training requirements for local law enforcement. And in the small town of Millfield, where one man's badge had once made him feel untouchable, the community slowly began to learn that real authority comes not from the power to intimidate, but from the responsibility to serve and protect all citizens equally. Marcus Thompson continued his work across rural Georgia, carrying the lessons of that roadside encounter with him. He had been reminded that progress often comes at a personal cost, and that the fight for dignity and justice requires both courage and patience. But he had also learned something else. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice is simply the truth. And the truth, when spoken with authority, has the power to change not just individual hearts and minds, but entire communities. The road to equality is long and difficult, marked by confrontations both large and small. But every step forward, every moment of accountability, every recognition that badges and uniforms are symbols of service rather than supremacy, brings society closer to the goal of justice for all. In Millfield County, change came slowly but inevitably, and it started with one phone call from the governor's office and one sheriff's painful realization that his power was never as absolute as he had believed.